High on praise and exaltation, we are Hope 103.1 FM. Hope 103.1 FM. Why listen to anything else?
Chosen generation, we've been called for to show His excellence. All I require for life, God has given me, and I know who I am. We are a chosen generation.
Blessed Wednesday afternoon.
To show His excellence. All I require for life.
Blessings to all listeners locked on to Hope 103.1 FM. It's Wednesday, the 23rd of March, 2022. We're just about ready to close down the first quarter of the year.
What He says I am, where He says I'm at, I know who I am.
Well, it's Wednesday.
I'm working miracles.
And on Wednesday evenings, we join Reverend John Lewis, who is an independent certified coach, trainer and speaker with the John Maxwell team, and the director of GITE, Grenada Institute for Theological Education. We join him for a wonderful session of Leadership Plus, where information is shared that ought to transform us into the leaders that God desires, yeah?
We are a chosen generation. We've been called for to show His excellence. All I require for life, God has given me.
Welcome, Reverend John. How are you today?
Good evening, and thank you. It's good to be with you this evening and to share with you on very important topic, the ultimate purpose of leadership. It's talk about the fulfillment of the Great Commission as a leader.
Right. I have a question just before we start today. Could you tell us some of the programs that are offered by the GITE and how can students, be involved?
Great, thank you. So the Grenada Institute for Theological Program is an arm of the Miami International Seminary, and we offer certificates, bachelor's degrees and master's degrees in theological studies. And we also offer leadership training programs. And recently we had our graduation, about 25 persons at different levels who graduate with a certificate in advanced leadership program and the certificate, associate degree, and bachelor's and master's program. And currently we are doing a course with Dr. George Frederick. He's teaching us a book study on the book of Esther. Now, students can become registered with our program by sending us an email, miagrenada@gmail.com. And perhaps there are a number of our viewers and listeners who would like to participate in this program of growth and personal development. Also, for those who live in Grenada, our office is located in Genangle, and I can see us there as well. The programs are offered via Zoom mainly these days. So you can be part of the program, as a matter of fact, any part of the globe, as we present our programs via Zoom. We want to encourage younger people, pastors and leaders as well, to join in this exciting journey of learning and in preparation for excellent work, not only within the context of the church environment, but also outside in the larger community. In the business community, we offer the John Maxwell Leadership books, programs of advanced leadership. And there we learn the principles of management and leadership. So it is a broad spectrum of studies. Some of our courses included parenting, marital intelligence, and we have done courses on expository preaching and also in cross-cultural missions. It provides a variety of different courses and topics. Our lecturers, our facilitators, our professors are drawn from a wide cross-section, including the Caribbean and also out of the United States of America. And so we encourage you to get started with the program. Credits are transferable from other institutions as well. And so it can shorten the time that you would spend in obtaining your degrees with guide and through the facility of the Miami International Seminary. So feel free to send us an email at miagrenade@gmail.com or by our office in Janangle. That's where our office is located physically. And so you can get further information, of course, through this radio program, Hope FM 103.1 FM. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, right here on island, you don't have to buy a ticket. We can find, an institution that can provide us with knowledge that will aid us in our personal growth. And that is very important for us as leaders. Today, as Reverend John would have mentioned earlier, our topic is the ultimate purpose of leadership, fulfilling the Great Commission as a leader. And preparing for today, again, my mind went straight to Jesus. His example, as we see it in scripture, he was focused, extremely focused. He came with a mission. He understood and fulfilled all that he came to do. He chose 12 men, he empowered them, and he gave them the Great Commission. And just over 2,000 years, we are products of what Jesus started. And as we dive into today's discussion, could you tell us, Reverend John, and start us off with telling us the importance or the ultimate purpose for our leadership development?
Great, thank you. So we will begin with some questions today to help get our minds thinking in that direction. So here are some questions for us to consider in terms of your ultimate purpose of leadership. So the question is, as you continue your leadership journey, it is essential to understand why God desires for you to deepen your leadership skills. Is it just for your personal growth, or is it just for the growth of your local church or organization? Or is it there a larger purpose, a purpose beyond your own life, your own organization, your own community? And the answer to these questions is yes. The ultimate purpose for your personal leadership development is to be more effective in your role of advancing the growth of His kingdom around the world. So perhaps I should repeat that to emphasize it. It says the ultimate purpose of your personal leadership development is to be more effective in your role of advancing the growth of His kingdom around the world. And so in our discussion today, we look at God and His plan for the people of the world. We look at some of the principles, some of the perspectives that we would gain from our study as we proceed today.
Wonderful. So as we mentioned earlier, God has a plan. He had a plan. He came with a mission. And when we are involved in His work, we ought to follow His plan, right? And the objectives that the kingdom is set out be established here on earth. So could you take us through some of what is God's plan for the people of the world?
Okay, so principle number one is that God is the center of all things. He is sovereign. He is ruler over everything and everyone. All things were created by Him and for Him. it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists through him and by him. And the second principle is God desires for all the people in all of the world to know him through Jesus Christ. And those are the primary principles of understanding who this great God is, the God who created life, created man, created us in his image and likeness. And so throughout the study today, we look at some principles. God desires all the people of the world not only to know him, but also to worship him. And it is about the whole question of, in light of this truth, how should that affect your priorities as a leader? And there's some realities that we want to look at. People must first hear of God before they can know him through Jesus Christ and worship him. And the reference here is, how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? Romans 10:14. So the focus of our discussion today is how you as a leader can become involved in this great mandate, this great mission that God has commissioned us to become involved with and become a part of his global mission for this earth. Only a portion of the world is hearing of Christ today. So in the midst of estimated some 8 billion people or so in our world today. And this population is growing. And there are a number of people still without access to the message that Christ brought during his time. Reality number 2 is that only a portion is hearing of Christ today. Number 3 is how we see the world determines how we feel about the world and how we respond to its needs at this time. So how does God see the people of the world? And that's just such a relevant question today as we observe what's happening on the world market, the world scene, as it were. We're bombarded every day by the hour by hour, of what's happening in Ukraine and this travesty of this war and death and destruction. And in spite of the evils that are taking place, they're still part of God's world. And the church does exist in that nation, and they are impacted by the destruction that's happening there. As a matter of fact, not only are they impacted, it is projected that the repercussions of that will affect many people across other regions of the world. So how do we see the world today in terms of interpreting the times in which we live, understanding the focus of what we ought to be doing, understand the mission that God has mandated us to become part of, world, to establish his kingdom, as it were, here on earth. And then we have to make disciples of all the nations. So it's a commission that challenges us to make disciples of every nation. So we're not limited to our own particular nation in which we live. And very often we become short-sighted, or our vision is nearsighted, as it were, so that we lose focus of the big picture in terms of the multiplied millions, billions, as a matter of fact, of people that need to hear about the kingdom that Christ came to establish here on earth. So we make disciples. And so the historical perspective focused on countries. And so as we look at the nations of the earth, we need to think in terms of what particular nation or what particular country that we may be asked to focus our attention on in view of the fact that there are many people that still need to hear this glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. So there are different ethnic groups, different languages, dialects that that is affecting every different continent and every nation. It's a discipline on our part to understand, to interpret, to learn perhaps a new language so that we can communicate to them in their own language and in their own tongue. So there are two groups of people described here. One is called the reached or the unreached. Some measure response as those who, this is God's part, that He has brought this great gift and this great salvation. But then there has to be a determination. It has to be an intentionality that we are not just committed to our own island, our own location in which we live and reside, but rather to think beyond the horizon, as it were, to think of the world, because the world has been brought right here in front of our screens every day, and how we can maximize the opportunities to communicate and to reach others with this great message of redemption in these times in which we live. There are some practical responses, as we've noticed that people can physically go to other nations to be involved in different aspects of mission, whether it's in relief and development work, whether it is in medical teams, whether it's in proclamation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it could be a combination of these things. We are noticing the great need and demand for physical need for food and shelter and clothing. How do you as an individual or as a church, as an organization respond to the needs when they are brought right before our screens and our doorsteps, as it were? So we must not ignore the challenges of the times in which we live, understanding what are the concerns that affect people's life in real life, and find a response that is relevant, a response that will affect their lives, not only physically and materially, but also in response to responding to the command to go and make disciples of all nations. There are some other perspectives that we will share. We are told that there are perspective number 3, talk about involuntary worshippers. At the name of Jesus, every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So there is a sense that the whole earth will one day bow down to the sovereign God, the sovereign Lord of all the earth. And then the others, because of the relationship, it says, and after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation, and all tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And so there is that day, as we look forward to, when every town, every nation, every people group would come before this Almighty King, this God of the creation, and worship Him and bow down before Him.
Yes, that is such a profound picture, and ultimately that is what the goal is as individuals serving God and as leaders, that of course we will stand before the throne and worship God for who He is, and we want to remind you that you can send in your questions and our comments on our YouTube platforms and or on WhatsApp number 103-403-1031. Today we're discussing the ultimate purpose of leadership, and it stems on our personal growth. It encourages us that when we get involved in leadership or personal growth, when we get involved in personal growth, it's not just for me, or for one specific person or just one specific group. It is so much that we become equipped to do the overall purpose of God. It's not just for our individual lives. God invested a lot in the 12 disciples, so much, and it has impacted the world, right? Just imagine where it started and to where the word and the gospel has gotten. So too, our impact as leaders can be. Yeah, God gave us the Great Commission, and we ought to do so. So Reverend John had just been talking about some principles, that under the God and his plan for the people of the world. Right, Reverend John, could you continue to take us into now the people of the world?
Great. So this is where all of us have a responsibility to understand how God is working. We must first hear of God before we can know him. So there is that responsibility as indicated. So they cannot hear without being told. Only a fraction of the world, a portion, are hearing this message. We give a rough statistic of the population of the earth. We talk about the countries, the peoples, how we should respond to that, and how we ought to be involved in this great mission. The church is God's instrument of mission. So Jesus leaves for us. So in the New Testament, there is a particular pattern of leadership that leaves for us a model of how we ought to lead in terms of the work that we do. So there's a pattern that described in Acts 2:41 to 47. So the center of this pattern is God, of course, and worship of God. And then there is the example of evangelism and worship and fellowship, prayer and discipleship. And they're all interconnected. But the heart of this pattern, of this methodology of leadership, as described in Acts chapter 2, provides for us a place of worship for God, that where our focus ought to be primarily. And as a result of that relationship and focus with God, all these other aspects of the developmental aspects of work and ministry comes out into full play, as it were. If we have this starting point in the wrong place, all the other aspects of this diagram, as it were, of this strategy falls out of place. So it begins with understanding the centrality of worship before God. And then all these other aspects of fellowship one with another, prayer, the discipleship, the evangelism, and all those flows out of the ministry and connects us all into how we will develop strategic plans for these aspects of leading a church and organization. And one of the challenge here is that we sometimes fail to develop one or two areas. You will find very often that if you belong to a congregation, organization, while they may have a strong sense of fellowship where the membership and the participants engage in activity that strengthens fellowship, very often they can become weak in the area of, say, evangelism. Or you might find that there's a strong focus on prayer, and they have no strong emphasis on discipleship, for example. But there has to be a balance. There has to be a complete overview of how all these areas for successful development of the entire body comes into play when all these areas are activated. They are concentrated on, they are priorities that no aspect of this plan or this model enshrined for us is left out. So it's like trying to sit on a three-legged stool, which was meant to be four legs, as it were. You're sitting on a chair that was intended to have four legs. One is missing or two is missing, you know, you're going to be falling on the ground. So in a similar way, if any of these legs, as it were, is missing from the strategic plan of leading and guiding and directing, it breaks down in terms of the function and the development of the people that we are seeking to lead and to guide. So this is a wonderful model for every leader to look at again. It is described as the body of Christ. The church is responsible for the Great Commission. And it's a pattern that was set before us in the inception of the church. So there's a process. So that's the plan of the growth. And then there's a process. And this process involves starting in Jerusalem. The church functioned well. And you notice the expansion of the work. And as we said, very often we like to stay in our own Jerusalem because comfortable. You know, we live, yes, we live in these beautiful parts of the Caribbean and, you know, nice weather, lovely beaches. And for those who may be in the colder countries, you know, it sounds great to be in these. And sometimes we become too contented with where we are, that we are not willing to launch out. But as you know, it is the commission, it is the mandate to leave your own Jerusalem. And even then, when the commission or the command was given, we found even then people were comfortable being around their own people and their friends and the culture. And very often it is through the persecution and hardships and difficulties, people were forced to flee the area in which they live. And sometimes we have to ask is, what would it take for us to get out of our comfort zone? Does it mean that God may have to send some trouble along our way, create some disturbance so that we become uncomfortable and have to move when the strategic plan is always there for us. We go into Judea, we go into Samaria, and that could mean for us in the region or the Caribbean islands or the regions of the world. And of course, ultimately, the commission behoves us, challenges us to go to the ends of the earth. And that could be anywhere where people may not have heard about this kingdom message that we seek to proclaim. Ultimately, what we want to see happen is that people come to know this great God. And so there's some pictures of the church. One of the pictures is that of the body. And when you look at your own body with so many different members, every finger on your hands have a particular function. The thumb, even to the little finger, and all the other members of your body, your hearing, your seeing, your smelling, your feet, and every member. And as a matter of fact, the ones that we can't see are the most important in that sense. The heart that beats and keep us alive, the lungs, the liver, internal organs.
The toenail we often ignore. As if you
Right.
stop one toenail, the whole body feels it.
Of course. So in the same way, like Paul was writing about, he says, in the same way that each member of your body has a specific function, even So similarly, each member of the body of Christ has a particular function to fulfill. And as we have shared on this Leadership Plus before, is that we need to identify the particular skills that you have been given or you have honed of your the experiences and learning that you have, and so that you function in the particular work and field that you are gifted in, not only in terms of your natural talents and spiritual giftings. And that's where you accelerate the work that you're commissioned to do. So it's always a reminder to discover what is the particular gifting, giftedness and skills and experiences that God has allowed you to have in such a way to use it effectively and efficiently in the body. Sometimes we may think, well, the little finger doesn't really have a function. The only fact to that is that if you lose it, you probably discover how many uses it had. And what may look insignificant, even within the analogy of the kingdom and of the body. Sometimes we may ignore people who may look insignificant to us. So we may not think of them as having some gift or some talent or experiences. But that is overlooking the significance of every member of the body in terms of the organization, in terms of the church, how that if each person functions efficiently within that body, how much more we can accomplish. And it is for the leadership of an organization, of a company, just like they would assign different roles and function within a corporation, within governments. You will find that there's a minister of finance, a minister of youth, or a minister of health or education. Okay, that's the particular field that they have been assigned to and may have expertise in those areas. In the same way within the business community, the accountant that keeps proper accounting records, the salespeople that go out there and sell their products. In the same way, within the body, within the kingdom body, that everyone is gifted and is trained for particular function. And so that's the leader's responsibility, or the leadership of the organization or denomination or individual church in that case, to carefully examine every person that comes through the door of their church, of their organization, and have perhaps a one-on-one with them. That takes time if you're going to meet with every person, but that is going to give you leverage for growth. And it's not just a handful of people, all the time doing all the work. Someone has painted a picture of the church is where on a game, of soccer, for example, there are 22 people on the field, kicking the ball and scoring, and they have all the stands are filled with spectators, and they having a good time, as it were, but they're not involved in the hard work in making this who wins this game. So we have to take the initiative, not only sometimes even to wait upon perhaps your leader who may have many things to look into, but even to make yourself available, because every individual should have the capacity to understand their gifts and skills and offer them up as a means to serve. And so we have to take initiatives as well as individuals and commit ourselves to become involved in the body ministry. And so that's one picture that we looked at in terms of how this functions. And then there's a sense of unity. Um, when every member of a body works in harmony, we are able to accomplish a physical activity or um, involved in a project because all of our capabilities and capacities are functioning and in place. When there is this unity, it creates disharmony as well. So we have to understand the impact and the import of unity within just like all the members in order to have an effective functioning body and efficient and function efficiently. We anticipate that every member of our body would function well to accomplish a particular function. In the same way, within the context of leading an organization, we need that sense of understanding the mission and the vision so that there is an understanding that we are on the same page, that there is unity in this, in accomplishing this particular task. So that's the second imagery of unity. We have seen images and pictures of that in teamwork. We'll see where imageries of videos of, um, for example, the birds teach us that if they want to fly far, that they rotate the function in their part of leading this particular flock. And the third imagery, um, it's what is referred to as diversity. So in the midst of that unity, we are different because unity does not necessarily mean uniformity, that we all look alike and we all speak alike and we all dress alike. But there is that distinctiveness about each person, the individual gifts and capabilities. And so we bring all our diversity of our gifts and our skills and experiences together to enhance the unity that we talked about. And how do we develop that as we move along?
Yes, we are talking and discussing under the topic, the ultimate purpose of leadership. And if you have missed the starting, you can always look at it afterwards, but you can join us right from this point. We are looking at pictures of what it is, of God's instrument of mission and how God wants us as leaders to function in his kingdom and generally as leaders, following his ways of doing things. Yes? Could you continue taking us through those pictures, Reverend?
Great. And so one other picture here is described as relationships. In one of our lessons not too long ago in our presentation, we talked about the significance and importance of how relationship affect your leadership. It can either make or break you. And so this is to emphasize that point again as we build those relationships within our team, developing a spirit of unity and sense of a single purpose in the midst of the diversity. These relationships enhances our own work and the development that we can have. If relationships are not in line with what the goal and mission is, it creates friction, creates dissonance. And so it has to be where we understand the significance of maintaining these relationship that gets us to the goal or the finish line, as it were. And so how do you create avenues and settings to strengthen these relationships? And that takes effort, and that takes time and takes work in order to create an environment of strong relationship within the organization, within your companies, within the church environment. How do you deliberately and plan for these exercises that can enhance those types of relationship that will be um, helpful in accomplishing the goals and objectives for which we want to accomplish. So these are some of the pictures, the word pictures that help us to understand um, how do we get to a place in terms of ultimately um, demonstrating the quality of leadership that is demanded of us, especially coming from the concept of reaching outside of our own box, as it were, and focusing outside of our own territories, as it were, our own environment, and pushing us out into a place that may sometimes become uncomfortable, but helps us to grow. One of the illustrations that is very helpful for this discussion is that we understand that the eagles tend to build their nests in very high mountain spaces, but they also not only build their nests in any kind of tree, as it were. They select a particular tree to build their huge nests for for eaglets. And so they will bring all the leaves and all that they could gather to make, as it were, a nest or a soft bed for when the eaglets are born. And so they will nest there and have the young eaglets. And after probably several weeks, it's about time for the mother to teach them how to fly. And she would gently begin to remove the bedding, as it were. So these trees are filled with thorns.
Yeah.
And so this bed is protected at first with the softness of the nest, but they are positioned on top of these protruding thorns. And the wisdom, as it were, of the eagle is that as they gradually remove the nesting for these eagles, eaglets, newborn eagles, when they're ready to fly, they're exposed to the thorns that would nudge them to want to move. It becomes uncomfortable. It becomes very uncomfortable,
Yes.
and they may make a lot of noise and wondering what in the world is their mother doing to them. And that's a way to get them out of this very comfortable, soft bed, as it were. And so they jump automatically because we respond to pain that way. We want to get as far from it as possible. And the mother eagle goes swoop them down because it's practice training. They may not be able to make their full flight in the first response to getting out of this discomfort. Swoops them back, bring them back up. They jump out again, and after several practices, they're able to soar on their own. And sometimes life is like that. We become so comfortable, and God in His sovereignty removes those environment that wants us to move and to soar to better things or greater things that we have never anticipated. Can you imagine if these eaglets were allowed to just be born and live in these? That, as a matter of fact, these nests will become too small for them
True.
at some point. But and so in the midst of the growing and development of your leadership skills. And God in His sovereign plan has a way to get us out of our place of comfort.
I
And
learned about that. Yeah, yeah. I learned about
yes,
that analogy not too long ago. Being an elder sister. I have younger siblings, and I sometimes have to encourage them some firm manners, and I had to do so for quite a while, and sometimes it got uncomfortable even for me. I got some very strong names. Make things uncomfortable. Put some boundaries. Say no. I got some titles I wouldn't mention. But sometimes these are the things that you have to do to let the eagles fly. And
yes,
not that the eagles are flying. I don't mind the names. The names don't mean anything now. And then after having been that way for a while, I was led to this analogy, and I remembered, wow, this is something spectacular.
it
The
is.
eagles make the mama eagle make these little eaglets so uncomfortable. You have to
Yes,
fly. You have to fly.
yes.
Before we go further, could you take us into some of the emotions? You went to St. Vincent right after the volcano, and you would have
Mhm.
moved out of being comfortable here. Could you tell us some of the emotions? Because I think that's what some of the people might be uncertain or afraid of when going out to the unfamiliar. Tell us some of the
Right.
emotions and some of the mental preparations into going to a place that you may not have been before.
Like you said, the word preparation is so key to this as you think of becoming involved in whatever tasks outside your boundaries that you want to become a part of. So, from our own experiences, we would have spent um, several weeks or into months of meeting as a team. Once the team had agreed that this is the number of persons that were willing to go,
Mhm.
um, just the knowledge of what to expect. And so we would have gathered information out of St. Vincent. At least a lot of the images were on screen here on the news of seeing the eruption, the damages, of what took place, during that eruption. So they're very familiar with some of that. So you need to have the information, the correct information, and the kind of resources that you would need. So, of course, the practicality of raising support and asking friends to help each team member get there, and writing to friends and organizations to assist. So that takes effort and time and work. And then the personal preparation for each person. So there were assignments to come back and report to our regular meeting times and to ask questions. And if they had doubts about, where they're going to stay, um, accommodation issues, transportation. As a matter of fact, one of the uh, one of the experiences that we had was that part of our travel to the sites to help with the recovery and the cleaning of ash from many buildings was a speedboat. So you could see all of these men, you know, um, in this little speedboat every morning, rushing from one side of the island to the other. And for some of them, it was the first experience they were having like that. But thankfully, they were well protected with um, life vests, and so all those kinds of preparation work was important. But in terms of understanding the mission is important.
Yeah.
Of course,
Goal.
we you prepare the best you can. You understand the context in which you're going. You have a sense of what may, but there are always emergencies. There's always adjustments that you have to make. So you get involved with such a mission with the understanding that things may not be exactly like what you prepared for, and you'll be asked to do um, perform roles that would benefit the group that you probably. So it's a learning curve as well, and so you have the prayer support, and that's critical when you talk about Christian mission. So you invite your church, you invite your friends to to keep you up in prayer for protection, um, because it was still a time when the pandemic was still there,
Mm-hmm.
and so you had to take the precaution in spite of all the work that you were doing. But the the end result of that was so beneficial, not only to the people that you serve, but to the team as a whole. And so our team came back with a new sense of mission and motivation,
Right.
having experienced that. So you're never the same, for it changes you. And that's one great way to become introduced to what can happen. St. Vincent was a nearby island, so that, its culture is very similar to Grenada.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a stepping stone that can take you into a different culture altogether, and to other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
But requires a kind of preparation that enables you. And of course, one of the word pictures we had here was one of unity, that you work as a team in the midst of the differences. Of course, everyone on the team, of course, like any team, is different, but they build strong relationship during those times. You work together, uh, you're traveling together, you're getting to see different aspects of the person that you did not know before, because it brings out,
Mm-hmm.
different aspects of your behavior and personality when you're exposed to unusual circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really very fruitful and productive time for us there as well.
Yes, I pray that it is much better there now. And
Yes, it
indeed,
is.
mhm,
Yes.
indeed, we are instruments of God's, mission. We are the leaders. We are the people that God is depending on to make a change in the world that we are on currently. We are the ones to be His instrument of change, to bring comfort, to bring hope to the lost. Could you take us through, the pattern of ministry or the process of growth and so as leaders?
Right. So there's some areas that we have to respond to in terms of the process that we all experience. In terms of the different fields that we entered, we talked a little bit about the different aspects of the response and accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about understanding the Jerusalem and the Judea and the Samaria and the ends of the earth. And those were important areas for us to focus on as we looked at how do we grow in our own faith. Because as we mentioned, those experiences of being in a different environment, of, of work, of relating to other people, um, causes you to grow. Um, you grow because you're learning how things can be done differently, and yet you you develop new skills um, in the context in which, well, we were involved with. Guys were, loading wheelbarrows. They were doing power washing. Perhaps they never have done some of that before. They were learning those new skills as to how does,
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, cleaning and all those manual things take place. Um, so we learn as we participate. We grow out of the experiences that stretches us sometimes. We're not accustomed to be on a speedboat every day going to work. uh, and so you're wondering if you will survive. But thankfully, everyone came back safely, and they were happy for that experience as well. So sometimes God may put you into a circumstance, not to make you afraid, but to make you courageous and make you strong,
Mm-hmm.
and to sometimes test your own faith, and to see that you come out of it a stronger, better person, productive leader in whatever field that God has placed you in. to serve during these times.
Yes. And oftentimes we have to be bold or courageous, as Esther would have been, not get comfortable. And because Mordecai had to remind her, maybe you are here where you are for such a time as this. And,
Yes.
she had to make a decision frightened. She said, if I perish, but I'm going still. So as leaders, we have to, sometimes we are in those places, but we got to take the lead, take the initiative, and the people was glad she did, I'm sure, because at the end of it all, they were saved. Many lives were saved. And so your initiative, you doing it afraid, may save many lives, So today we were talking about the ultimate purpose of leadership. And throughout our past leadership sessions, we learned that leadership is not for the weak in heart. And, being a leader is not just a position or a title. There's much more to being a leader. It's a big responsibility not to be taken lightly, as so many lives are being affected and influenced. So we go just about wrapping up for today. Are there any applications that you want to leave with the listeners?
Right. So it is always calling us to think back upon our own lives and how we should respond to these in the midst of all that we talked about today. So here's some reflections for us. How effective is your congregation fulfilling the function of your local church? We look at the pattern in Acts 2:41 of worship, of prayer, of discipleship, fellowship, study. How do we align ourselves with those principles? So it's for self-examination, self-assessment. Even as a congregation, assess how we function given this model for us within the context of our own leadership as well. So that's a question. And what is it that we're going to invest in terms of our own local involvement, whether it's in our business, our organization, or within the context of the church?
All right. Thank you so much. So we want to thank all our listeners for joining us today. This was another session of Leadership Plus, the 23rd day of March, 2022. And we want to remind you that to keep it locked onto Hope 103.1 FM. We have a few exciting events coming up, which you will hear more of. We have a walk on the 23rd of April, I believe. But you'll hear more about this. So you got to keep it locked onto Hope 103.1 FM. Reverend John, we really thank you for being with us this afternoon. Thank you for enlightening the listeners and showing us more and more of what it really takes to be a leader in this era.
Thank you. God bless you.
Do enjoy the balance of your Wednesday afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I know who I am. We are the chosen generation.